A lonely rancher found a wounded Comanche girl in his barn. She wasn't there by accident. Jacob Brennan found the blood trail first. Dark drops in the hay, leading from his barn door to the shadows in the back corner. Fresh blood. Still wet. His Colt was in his hand before his mind caught up to what his eyes were seeing. 3 families slaughtered by Comanche raiders in the past month. 20 miles south, but close enough that he'd been sleeping with his rifle within arm's reach. Close enough that finding blood in his barn meant only one thing: they'd come for him. Lightning split the Texas sky, illuminating the barn in harsh white light. In that split second, Jacob saw her. A young Comanche woman, crumpled behind his feed bins like a broken doll. Blood matted her black hair. Her doeskin dress was torn, stained crimson. She wasn't moving. Thunder crashed overhead as Jacob struck a match with trembling fingers. The flame revealed what the lightning had hidden: rope burns on her wrists, raw and bleeding. A bullet grazed along her ribs. And her face. God, someone had beaten her nearly to death. This wasn't a raider. This was a victim. She stirred as the matchlight fell across her, dark eyes fluttering open to fix on his face with startling clarity. She said something in Comanche, urgent, desperate words he couldn't understand. But the terror in her voice was universal. Then she whispered a single word in English, so soft he almost missed it. Please. The match burned down to his fingers. In the sudden darkness, Jacob heard her breathing, shallow, labored, failing. She was dying. Right here in his barn, this girl who couldn't be more than 19 was bleeding out onto his hay. Every instinct screamed at him to mount his horse and ride for the fort. Report the Comanche presence. Let the army deal with whatever this was. Instead, he holstered his gun and lifted her into his arms. Rain began drumming on the barn roof as he carried her toward the house, her blood soaking into his shirt. Whatever had brought her here, whatever she was running from, it was worse than death. And Jacob Brennan had never been able to turn his back on someone in need. Jacob kicked open the door to his cabin, the girl's weight nothing in his arms despite her obvious height. She stirred as he laid her on his bed, dark eyes fluttering open for a moment before consciousness fled again. In the lamplight, he could see the extent of her injuries, not just the head wound, but rope burns on her wrists and a bullet grazed along her ribs. Someone had hurt her. Badly. He'd learned field medicine during his years as a cavalry scout, before he'd grown sick of the killing and claimed this land for his own. Now those skills served him as he cleaned her wounds with practiced efficiency. The head wound was worst, a blow from something heavy, maybe a rifle butt. The bullet had barely touched her, but the rope burns told a story that made his hands shake with anger. She'd been bound, probably dragged. As he worked, she began to stir, her eyes opening to fix on his face with startling clarity. She said something in Comanche, her voice weak but urgent. He didn't understand the words, but the fear in her voice was universal. Easy, he said, the same tone he'd used with a frightened horse. You're safe now. She tried to sit up, gasping as the movement sent pain through her ribs. Jacob gently pressed her back down, his hands careful on her shoulders. She was trembling from cold, pain, or terror. He couldn't tell. Maybe all 3. He fetched a blanket from the chest at the foot of his bed, tucking it around her despite her weak attempts to push him away. Her skin was cold as winter stream water, and he built up the fire until the cabin was warm enough to chase away her shivers. When he turned back to her, she was watching him with those dark eyes, trying to assess whether he meant her harm. She was beautiful, he realized with a start, not the soft beauty of town girls, but something wild and fierce, like a hawk with a broken wing. Water, he said, miming drinking. She nodded slightly, and he helped her sip from a cup, her lips dry and cracked. Some of the wariness left her eyes as the water eased her throat. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the cabin, something had shifted. She was no longer just an injured stranger, she was under his protection now, and Jacob Brennan had never been one to take such responsibility lightly. Morning came gray and subdued, the storm having passed in the night. Jacob woke to find the girl sitting up in bed, her back pressed against the wall, watching him with the alertness of a cornered animal. She'd managed to braid her hair despite her injured hands, and the simple act somehow made her seem more human, less like the wild creature he'd found in his barn. He moved slowly, keeping his hands visible as he approached with a plate of eggs and bread. She shook her head when he offered it, her lips pressed into a thin line. You need to eat, he said gently. Lost a lot of blood. She understood English, he could see it in her eyes, but she remained silent. When he set the plate on the small table beside the bed, she pushed it away with one bandaged hand. Jacob sat in the chair across from her, careful to keep his distance. I'm Jacob, he said, touching his chest. "This is my land, my home. You're safe here." For the first time, she spoke in English, her voice hoarse but clear. "No place is safe for my people." The words hit him like a physical blow. He'd seen the aftermath of raids on both sides, white families butchered, Comanche villages burned. The cycle of violence had been spinning for years, fed by hatred and fear. "What's your name?" he asked. She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, "Ayana." "Ayana," he repeated, and something in his pronunciation made her eyes narrow. "It means eternal blossom, doesn't it?" Surprise flickered across her features. Few white men bothered to learn even basic Comanche words. "You know our language?" "Some. Picked it up during my scouting days." He didn't mention how he learned it, tracking war parties, translating for army commanders who saw the Comanche as nothing more than obstacles to be removed. That seemed like another lifetime now. She studied his face with new interest. "You were a soldier." "Was. Not anymore." He gestured around the simple cabin. "This is what I am now. A rancher. Nothing more. And you expect me to believe you will help me? That you will not turn me over to the soldiers when they come looking?" The question hung between them like smoke. Jacob knew she was right to be suspicious. Most men in his position would have already ridden to Fort Richardson to report finding her. The army paid good money for information about Comanche movements. "They won't come looking," he said finally. "Not unless someone tells them you're here." She laughed, a bitter sound. "And why would you keep silent? What do you gain from helping me?" Jacob considered the question. He'd been asking himself the same thing since he'd carried her into his cabin. Maybe I'm tired of the killing. Maybe I've seen enough suffering for one lifetime. Pretty words from a man who made his living hunting my people. Her words stung because they were true. He had hunted Comanche warriors, had been good at it. But he'd never harmed women or children, never participated in the massacres that had blackened both sides of this conflict. "Eat," he said, pushing the plate back toward her. "Then we'll talk about what happens next." This time, she didn't refuse. "Before we continue, comment where you're tuning in from, and if this story has touched you, make sure to subscribe because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." 3 days passed in careful routine. Jacob tended to his small herd of cattle while Ayana recovered her strength, and each evening he returned to find her a little less wary, a little more willing to meet his eyes. She'd moved from the bed to the chair by the fire, her wounds healing cleanly under his care. On the 4th morning, he woke to find her gone. Panic seized him as he searched the cabin, calling her name. He found her behind the house, kneeling beside his small vegetable garden. She looked up at his approach, her hands dirty from pulling weeds. "The plants were dying," she said simply, as if that explained everything. Jacob stared at the neat rows of beans and squash, at the careful way she'd cleared the choking weeds and turned the soil. "You didn't have to. I do not take without giving." She stood, brushing dirt from her hands. "This is the way of my people." He wanted to tell her she didn't owe him anything, that saving her life had been the decent thing to do. But something in her expression stopped him. This wasn't about debt, it was about dignity. "Thank you," he said instead. That evening, she cooked supper using supplies from his larder but methods that were entirely her own. The meat was seasoned with wild herbs she'd gathered, the bread flat and cooked on a stone over the fire. It was the best meal he'd had in years. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" he asked. "My grandmother." She said, "A woman who cannot feed her family is no woman at all." Ayana's voice held a note of sadness. "She is dead now. Killed in a raid 2 winters ago." Jacob set down his fork. "I'm sorry. Your people killed her." "Soldiers came to our winter camp under a flag of truce. When we came out to parley, they opened fire." She met his eyes across the table. "My grandmother shielded me with her body. I lived because she died." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with grief and accusation. Jacob felt the weight of every uniform he'd ever worn, every order he'd ever followed. "I've never killed women or children," he said quietly. "But I've served with men who have. I've seen what we've done to your people, and I know it's wrong." "Then why did you do it?" The question he'd been asking himself for years. "Because I was young and angry and stupid. Because I thought I was serving my country. Because I didn't know how to stop." Ayana considered this, her dark eyes searching his face. "And now I'm trying to be better than I was." She nodded slowly, and some of the tension left her shoulders. For the first time since he'd found her, she smiled, just a small curve of her lips, but it transformed her face entirely. "My grandmother used to say that a man who admits his mistakes is halfway to wisdom. What about the other half? Learning not to make them again." The riders came at dawn on the 7th day, their horses' hooves drumming against the hard-packed earth. Jacob saw them from his bedroom window, 6 men in army blue, led by a lieutenant he recognized from Fort Richardson. Captain Morrison's boy, fresh from West Point and eager to make his mark. "Ayanna," he called softly, but she was already awake, already moving toward the back door with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent her life running from soldiers. "The root cellar," Jacob said, pointing to the small door hidden beneath a rug in the corner. "They won't think to look there." She hesitated, her hand on the latch. "If they find me." "They won't. If they do, you must not defend me. Promise me this." Jacob shook his head. "I won't let them take you. Promise me." Her voice was fierce, urgent. "Your life is worth more than mine. Do not throw it away." Before he could respond, she was gone, disappearing into the small space beneath the floorboards. Jacob replaced the rug and opened the front door just as the soldiers reached his porch. "Morning, Lieutenant Hayes," he said, leaning against the doorframe with studied casualness. "What brings you out this way?" Hayes was young, maybe 25, with the kind of pale skin that burned easily under the Texas sun. His uniform was spotless, his boots polished to a mirror shine. He'd never seen real action, Jacob guessed. "Mr. Brennan, we're tracking a Comanche war party that hit the Dawson place 3 days ago. Killed the whole family, burned the house to the ground." Jacob's blood went cold. The Dawsons had been good people, had helped him build his barn when he'd first settled here. Any survivors? None. But we found tracks leading this way. Fresh ones. Hayes dismounted, his hand resting on his saber hilt. "You seen any sign of Indians on your land?" "No, sir. Been quiet as a church out here." One of the soldiers, a grizzled sergeant with scars on his hands, was studying the ground around the cabin. "Lieutenant, there's tracks here. Unshod horse, Indian pony for sure." Jacob's mouth went dry. Ayanna's horse. He'd found it grazing near the barn the morning after the storm and had turned it loose, thinking it would find its way back to the Comanche camp. But the tracks would still be there, pressed into the mud from the rain. "Mind if we take a look around?" Hayes asked, but it wasn't really a question. "Help yourself," Jacob said, knowing refusal would only make them more suspicious. The soldiers spread out, checking the barn, the outbuildings, even the small shed where Jacob kept his tools. The sergeant poked at the vegetable garden, noting the freshly turned soil. "Somebody's been working this ground recent," he called to Hayes. "And I don't think it was Mr. Brennan here." These weeds were pulled by small hands. Woman's hands. Hayes turned back to Jacob, his eyes narrowing. "You sure you haven't seen any Indians, Mr. Brennan?" "Dead sure. Because harboring hostile Indians is a federal offense, punishable by death." Jacob met his stare without flinching. "I'm aware of the law, Lieutenant." The search continued for another hour, the soldiers growing more frustrated as they found nothing definitive. Finally, Hayes mounted his horse, his face red with anger and embarrassment. "We'll be back," he said. "This area is not secure. There's savages about, and they're dangerous." "I'll keep my eyes open," Jacob replied. As the soldiers rode away, Jacob waited until they were out of sight before releasing Ayanna from the root cellar. She emerged pale and shaking, dirt in her hair and fear in her eyes. "They killed the Dawsons," Jacob said quietly. "A whole family." Ayanna closed her eyes, her face crumpling with grief. It was not supposed to happen like this. The raid was meant to be swift, clean. Take horses and supplies, nothing more. Jacob stared at her. "You knew about the raid?" "I tried to stop it. That is why I was hurt, why I was running." She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "My brother led the war party. I followed them, tried to convince them to turn back. The white settlers have been fair to us, trading honestly, not cheating us like others. But my brother, he is young and angry. He would not listen. So you tried to stop them, and they hurt you for it?" "My brother's friend struck me when I tried to turn his horse. I fell, hit my head on a rock. When I woke, they were gone." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I was trying to reach the Dawson place, to warn them. But I was too late." Jacob felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of a knot he hadn't realized was there. She'd been trying to save the Dawsons, not harm them. She'd been willing to risk her own life to prevent the violence. "The soldiers will be back," he said. "They suspect something. Then I must go." "No." The word came out sharper than he'd intended. "You're not strong enough yet. And besides, where would you go? Your own people tried to kill you." She looked at him with those dark eyes, and he saw the fear there, the desperation of someone caught between two worlds with no place to belong. "I will not bring danger to your door," she said. "Too late for that," Jacob replied. "The danger's already here." The days that followed were filled with a strange, tense domesticity. Ayanna helped with the daily chores, milking the cow, gathering eggs, tending the garden, while Jacob worked to prepare for the inevitable return of the soldiers. He moved supplies to hidden caches, prepared escape routes, and cleaned his weapons with the thoroughness of a man expecting war. But it was in the evenings, when the work was done and they sat by the fire, that something deeper began to grow between them. Ayanna would tell him stories of her people, not the savage tales he'd heard from other soldiers, but stories of honor and family, of respect for the land and the careful balance between taking and giving back. "We do not own the earth," she said one night, her voice soft in the firelight. "We are its children, and it provides for us. But the white man wants to possess everything, the land, the animals, even the sky." "Not all of us," Jacob said. "Some of us just want to live in peace. Like you." He considered the question. "I thought I did. But maybe I was just hiding from the world." And now, Jacob looked at her across the fire, at the way the flames played across her face, highlighting the strong line of her jaw and the intelligence in her eyes. "Now I think maybe hiding isn't enough." She was quiet for a long moment, studying his face. "My grandmother used to say that the earth speaks to those who listen. That is how we know where to find water, where the buffalo will run, when the storms will come." "What does it tell you now?" "That change is coming. That the old ways are ending, and something new must take their place." She met his eyes. "But I do not know if it will be something good or something terrible. Maybe that depends on the choices we make." "Yes," she said quietly. "Maybe it does." On the 10th night, Jacob woke to find Ayanna standing at the window, her silhouette outlined against the moonlight. She was wearing one of his shirts over her doeskin dress, the oversized garment making her look younger, more vulnerable. "Can't sleep?" he asked. She shook her head. "I keep thinking about the Dawsons. About their children." Jacob had been thinking about them too. The Dawson children had been young, a boy of maybe 8, a girl not much older. They'd been shy but curious, always asking questions about his horses and his cattle. "It wasn't your fault," he said. "Wasn't it? I failed to stop them. I failed to warn the family in time. You tried. That's more than most would have done." She turned to face him, and in the moonlight, he could see tears on her cheeks. "Sometimes trying is not enough." Jacob rose from his bed, crossing to stand beside her at the window. Without thinking, he reached out to touch her face, his thumb brushing away a tear. She didn't pull away. "Sometimes it has to be," he said. For a moment, they stood there in the silver light, separated by inches and cultures in the weight of history. Then Ayanna stepped back, the spell broken. "I should not be here," she said. "In your home, in your bed. My people would say I have brought shame on myself." "Your people aren't here," Jacob said gently. "And I've never thought there was shame in kindness." She looked at him for a long moment, something unreadable in her expression. "You are not like other white men I have known." "How so?" "You see me as a person, not a savage or a trophy. You do not try to change me or own me." Jacob felt something tighten in his chest. "Is that what you think I should do?" "It is what most would do." "I'm not most men." "No," she said softly. "You are not." The next morning, Jacob found her in the garden again, but this time she wasn't alone. A small gray cat had appeared from somewhere, winding around her legs as she worked. It was thin and obviously feral, but it seemed to trust her completely. "Where did he come from?" Jacob asked. "I do not know. He was here when I woke." She scratched behind the cat's ears, and it purred loudly. "I think he is lost, like me. Maybe he's not lost. Maybe he's found." She looked up at him, and for the first time since he'd known her, she smiled without reservation. "Maybe." The attack came at sunset on the 14th day, not from soldiers but from Comanche warriors. Jacob was in the barn when he heard the war cries, the thunder of unshod ponies circling the house. He grabbed his rifle and ran for the cabin, his heart pounding with fear for Ayanna. He found her crouched by the window, her face pale but determined. "It is my brother," she said. "He has come for me." "Stay down," Jacob ordered, checking the loads in his weapons. Through the window, he could see 6 warriors circling the house, their faces painted for war. One of them, younger than the others but clearly the leader, sat his horse with the arrogance of youth. "Ayanna," the young warrior called in Comanche. "Come out. You have brought shame on our family long enough." She rose despite Jacob's protests, moving to the door. "I must face him," she said. "If I do not, he will burn your house with you inside it. Don't go out there. He will not harm me. I am his sister. He already tried to kill you once." She turned to look at him, and he saw the pain in her eyes. "He is still my blood. My family." Before Jacob could stop her, she opened the door and stepped onto the porch. The young warrior, her brother, dismounted and strode toward her, his face twisted with rage. "You live among the whites like a dog," he said in English, clearly intending Jacob to understand. "You betray your own people for the comfort of a soft bed and hot food." "I betrayed no one," Ayanna replied, her voice steady. "I tried to prevent unnecessary killing. The Dawsons were our enemies. They took our land, killed our buffalo. They were peaceful people. They never harmed us." Her brother struck her then, a backhanded blow that sent her sprawling. Jacob was through the door before she hit the ground, his rifle trained on the young warrior's chest. "Touch her again, and I'll kill you," he said quietly. The warrior laughed, but his eyes were wary. The white man protects his pet savage. "How touching." "My name is Jacob Brennan," Jacob said, not lowering his rifle. "And your sister is not my pet. She's under my protection. She is Comanche. She belongs with her people. She belongs wherever she chooses to be." The warrior looked at his sister, who was struggling to her feet, blood trickling from the corner of her mouth. "You choose this? This exile among enemies?" Ayanna looked from her brother to Jacob, and something in her expression changed. "I choose to follow my own heart." "Then you are no sister of mine." The words hit her like a physical blow. Jacob saw her flinch, saw the pain that crossed her face. But she straightened her shoulders and met her brother's eyes. "So be it," she said. Her brother remounted his horse, his face cold with disgust. "If you will not come willingly, then we will take you. And we will kill your white protector." "You're welcome to try," Jacob said, his finger tightening on the trigger. The standoff stretched for long moments, the only sound the snorting of horses and the whisper of wind through the grass. Finally, the young warrior raised his hand, and the other warriors formed up behind him. "We will return," he said. "And next time, we will not be so merciful." They rode away in a cloud of dust, leaving Jacob and Ayanna alone in the growing darkness. She was still bleeding from her brother's blow, but when Jacob tried to help her, she pulled away. "I am sorry," she said. "I have brought this trouble on you." "You didn't bring anything." "They did. It is the same thing." Jacob set down his rifle and moved to her side, gently tilting her chin up to examine the cut on her lip. "No," he said. "It's not." But even as he spoke, he knew their time was running out. The warriors would return, and when they did, they would come in force. And there was nowhere to run. The soldiers wanted her as much as her own people did. They were trapped between two worlds, with enemies on all sides. The decision came at dawn 3 days later, when Jacob spotted the dust cloud on the horizon. Two groups of riders, approaching from different directions, soldiers from the east, Comanche from the west. They would arrive within hours of each other, and Jacob knew this was no coincidence. "They're working together," he told Ayanna as they watched from the cabin window. "Your brother and the army. They've made some kind of deal." She nodded, unsurprised. "My brother wants me back to save face. The soldiers want information about our camps. They will trade one for the other, and you'll be caught in the middle. It was always going to end this way." She turned from the window, her face calm despite the approaching danger. "You should go. Take your horse and ride south. There are friends of yours in San Antonio who will help you." Jacob stared at her. "What are you talking about?" "I am talking about saving your life. If you are here when they arrive, they will kill you. My brother will not let you live after what you said to him." "I'm not leaving you. You must. There is no other choice." Jacob crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "There's always a choice. And I'm choosing to stay." "Then you are choosing to die." "Maybe. But I'm not choosing to live without you." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Ayanna searched his face, looking for something she could trust. "You barely know me," she said quietly. "I know enough. I know you're brave and kind and honorable. I know you tried to save people who weren't even your own. I know you've shown me how to be a better man than I was." Tears gathered in her eyes. "And I know you are good and gentle and strong. I know you saved my life when you could have left me to die. I know you make me want to believe in tomorrow. Then believe in it. With me." She closed her eyes, and when she opened them, her decision was made. "There is a place," she said. "A canyon to the north, hidden in the rocks. If we can reach it, we can disappear. But it means leaving everything behind. Your ranch, your cattle, your life here. My life is wherever you are. The journey will be hard. We will be hunted by both sides. Then we'll be hunted together." She smiled through her tears. "You are a fool, Jacob Brennan." "Maybe. But I'm your fool." They had perhaps an hour before the first riders arrived. Jacob packed quickly food, water, ammunition, and the few possessions he couldn't bear to leave behind. Ayanna gathered her things, which amounted to little more than her torn dress and a small medicine bag her grandmother had given her. "I'm sorry," she said as they prepared to leave. About your ranch. Your home. Jacob looked around the cabin one last time, at the fireplace where they'd shared so many evenings, at the bed where she'd recovered from her injuries, at the simple table where they'd eaten their meals together. It was the first real home he'd ever known. Home isn't a place, he said. It's the people you choose to share your life with. They slipped out the back door as the first riders crested the hill to the east. Jacob's best horse was already saddled, and they mounted together, Ayana's arms around his waist as they rode toward the rocky hills to the north. Behind them, shouts erupted as the soldiers and Comanche discovered the empty cabin. The chase had begun. The canyon Ayana had spoken of was a hidden cleft in the rocks, barely wide enough for a horse to pass through. They'd been riding hard for 3 hours, and Jacob's horse was lathered with sweat and beginning to stumble. Their pursuers were less than a mile behind, the dust of their passage visible against the clear sky. There, Ayana said, pointing to what looked like a shadow in the cliff face. The entrance. Jacob guided the horse toward the narrow opening, branches catching at their clothes as they squeezed through. The canyon opened up beyond, revealing a small valley hidden from the outside world. A spring bubbled up from the rocks, feeding a pool of clear water surrounded by cottonwoods. How did you know about this place? Jacob asked as they dismounted. My grandmother brought me here as a child. She said it was a place of power, where the spirits of the earth were strong. Jacob could feel it, a sense of peace and safety that seemed to emanate from the very rocks. But their pursuers were still coming, and the canyon had only one way in or out. We're trapped, he said. No. There is another way out, but it is dangerous. A path up the cliff face that leads to the mesa above. But first, we must face what follows us. The sound of hoofbeats echoed from the canyon entrance, magnified by the rock walls. Jacob checked his rifle, making sure it was loaded. Ayana touched the knife at her belt, her face set with determination. Whatever happens, she said, I want you to know that these have been the happiest days of my life. Don't talk like that. We're going to get out of this. Perhaps. But if we do not? Jacob silenced her with a kiss, fierce and desperate and full of everything he couldn't say. When they parted, both were breathing hard. We're going to live, he said. We're going to have a life together. Yes, she whispered. We are. The first riders entered the canyon, soldiers, led by Lieutenant Hayes. They spread out in a line, rifles raised, their faces grim with purpose. Behind them came the Comanche warriors, including Ayana's brother. There's nowhere to run, Hayes called out. Surrender now, and we'll make this easy. Easy for who? Jacob called back. For you. The girl comes with us, and you get to live. That's not happening. Ayana stepped forward, her chin raised defiantly. I will not be traded like a horse or a blanket. I am a free woman, and I choose my own path. Her brother spurred his horse forward, his face twisted with anger. You choose dishonor. You choose to betray your people for this white man. I choose love over hatred, she replied. I choose hope over revenge. Then you choose death. He raised his rifle, aiming not at his sister, but at Jacob. The shot echoed through the canyon like thunder, but Jacob was already moving, diving to the side as the bullet whined past his head. He rolled, came up firing, and saw the young warrior tumble from his horse. Chaos erupted. Soldiers and Comanche opened fire, the canyon filling with smoke and the crash of gunshots. Jacob grabbed Ayana's hand and pulled her toward the cliff face, where a narrow path zigzagged up the rocks. Go, he shouted. I'll hold them off. Not without you. A bullet spanged off the rock beside them, showering them with stone chips. Jacob pushed Ayana toward the path, then turned to face their pursuers. His rifle cracked again and again, each shot carefully aimed. He wasn't trying to kill, just to keep them at bay long enough for Ayana to escape. But there were too many of them, and his ammunition was running low. A bullet caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. He fell to one knee, his rifle clattering away across the rocks. Jacob. Ayana's voice, filled with terror. He looked up to see her halfway up the cliff face, her face pale with fear. Below, the soldiers were advancing, their rifles trained on him. Go, he shouted. Please, just go. But she was already climbing back down, her face set with determination. She dropped to the ground beside him, pulling the knife from her belt. I will not leave you, she said. You stubborn, beautiful fool. You're stubborn, beautiful fool, she corrected, and despite everything, Jacob found himself smiling. They stood together, backs to the cliff, facing their enemies. Jacob's shoulder burned where the bullet had hit him, but his gun hand was steady. Ayana held her knife like she knew how to use it, her dark eyes fierce with protective fury. Last chance, Hayes called out. Surrender now, or we'll kill you both. Go to hell, Jacob replied. Hayes raised his rifle, and Jacob knew this was the end. He'd failed to save her, failed to give her the life she deserved. But at least they would die together, and maybe that was enough. The shot never came. Instead, a new voice rang out across the canyon, older, weathered, carrying the authority of years. Stand down, Lieutenant. All of you, lower your weapons. Jacob looked up to see a figure silhouetted against the canyon rim, an older man in cavalry uniform, his graying hair visible beneath his hat. Behind him stood a line of soldiers, their rifles trained on Hayes and his men. Colonel Morrison, Hayes stammered, his face going white. Sir, I can explain. I'm sure you can, Lieutenant. And you will. But first, you'll step away from those civilians. Morrison's voice carried the kind of command that brooked no argument. Hayes and his men reluctantly lowered their weapons, confusion clear on their faces. The Comanche warriors looked around uncertainly, no longer sure who their allies were. An older Comanche man rode forward from among the warriors, a chief, Jacob realized, noting the elaborate feathers in his hair and the respect the other warriors showed him. He spoke rapidly in Comanche to Iana's brother, who argued back with obvious frustration. Finally, the older man raised his hand for silence. I am Chief Standing Bear, he said in accented but clear English. This foolish boy is my nephew. He has acted without permission, without wisdom. Iana gasped beside Jacob. Uncle. Standing Bear's stern expression softened slightly as he looked at his niece. Hello, little Blossom. You have led us quite a chase. How did you? Your grandmother was my sister. When you disappeared, I came looking for you myself. His gaze shifted to Jacob, measuring and evaluating. This is the man you have chosen? Iana straightened, her chin lifting proudly. This is Jacob Brennan. He saved my life and asked nothing in return. He protected me when his own people would have killed me. He chose love over duty, kindness over hatred. Standing Bear studied Jacob for a long moment. You were a cavalry scout. Yes, sir. You fought against my people. I did. And I came to regret it. Why? Jacob considered his words carefully. Because I learned that honor and courage and love exist in all people, regardless of the color of their skin. Because I saw that the war between U.S. was built on fear and misunderstanding, not justice. The old chief nodded slowly. And now? What do you want now? To build a life with your niece. To raise children who know both our ways. To prove that peace is possible. Standing Bear looked between them, seeing the way they stood together despite their injuries, despite the rifles still pointed in their direction. And you, Iana? Is this what you want? Yes, Uncle. More than anything. Colonel Morrison had climbed down into the canyon, his face grim as he approached Lieutenant Hayes. Lieutenant, you're under arrest for conducting unauthorized military operations and collaborating with hostile forces without proper authority. Sir, I was only You were only making a mess of a delicate situation. Thanks to your cowboy heroics, we've nearly precipitated another war. Morrison turned to Standing Bear. Chief, I apologize for this young fool's actions. The Army does not sanction this kind of behavior. Standing Bear inclined his head slightly. Your apology is noted, Colonel. But what of my niece and this man? Will you allow them to live in peace? Morrison looked at Jacob and Iana, taking in their obvious devotion to each other, the protective way Jacob stood despite his wound, the fierce love in Iana's eyes. As far as the Army is concerned, he said slowly, we never found them. We were chasing rumors and shadows, nothing more. Iana's brother stepped forward, his face still twisted with anger. She is Comanche. She belongs with her people. Standing Bear fixed him with a stern look. She is a grown woman who has made her choice. Would you force her to live without love? Would you condemn her to unhappiness to satisfy your pride? She brings shame on our family. The only shame here is your own stubbornness. The chief's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. You will return to our camp and think carefully about the kind of man you wish to be. Your sister has shown more courage and wisdom than you have. The young warrior's face flushed with anger, but he didn't dare argue with his uncle. He mounted his horse and rode from the canyon, leaving his war party to follow. Standing Bear approached Jacob and Iana, his weathered face grave. You understand what you are choosing? Life will not be easy for you. Many on both sides will see your union as wrong. We understand, Jacob said, but we believe it's worth fighting for. And children? How will you raise children caught between two worlds? Iana spoke up, her voice strong and clear. We will teach them the best of both worlds. Honor from the Comanche way, justice from the white man's law. Love of the land and respect for all people. The old chief smiled for the first time. Your grandmother would be proud. She always said you were wise beyond your years. He reached into his medicine bag and drew out a small beaded necklace, turquoise and silver worked into an intricate pattern. This was hers. She told me to give it to you when you found your true path. Ayana accepted the necklace with tears in her eyes. Thank you, Uncle. Standing Bear turned to Jacob. And you, Scout, what can you offer my niece besides love? A home, protection, a chance to live freely without fear. Jacob paused, then added, and my promise that I'll spend every day trying to be worthy of her. That is all any man can promise. Standing Bear extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Jacob shook it. You have my blessing for what it's worth. But know this, if you ever harm her, I will hunt you to the ends of the earth. You won't need to, Jacob said. If I ever harm her, I'll save you the trouble. 6 months later, Jacob stood on the porch of their new cabin, watching Ayana work in the garden they'd planted together. The cabin was larger than his old one, built in a valley 20 miles north of his former ranch, far from the main travel routes but close enough to the trading post at Cedar Creek for supplies. The wound in his shoulder had healed, leaving only a small scar that Ayana traced sometimes in the evenings when they sat by the fire. They built this life together, literally, in some cases, as Ayana had proven surprisingly skilled with an axe and hammer. The corn is coming in well, she called to him, straightening from her weeding. The little gray cat wound around her legs, grown fat and content in their care. Should be ready to harvest next week, Jacob agreed. Tom Brennigan says he'll trade us winter supplies for half the crop. Tom Brennigan ran the trading post and had been one of the few people willing to do business with them openly. Most of the local ranchers still viewed them with suspicion, but a few had begun to come around, especially after Jacob had helped organize a successful defense against a gang of rustlers. The sound of hoofbeats made them both look up. A rider was approaching, a young man in clean clothes, leading a pack horse. As he drew closer, Jacob recognized him as Billy Hayes, the former lieutenant's younger brother. Mr. Brennan, Billy called as he dismounted. Ma'am. He touched his hat respectfully to Ayana. Billy, Jacob replied cautiously. The Hayes family had been civil since the colonel had cashiered the lieutenant and sent him back east in disgrace, but Jacob was still wary. I come with a message from my pa, Billy said. He's wondering if you might be interested in a proposition. What kind of proposition? Well, sir, he's thinking of expanding his operation. Needs someone who knows the country, knows how to deal with different kinds of people. Billy's eyes flicked to Ayana, but there was respect in his gaze, not suspicion. He's heard you're fair and honest, and that carries weight with him. Jacob considered this. Samuel Hayes owned one of the largest spreads in the territory, and his endorsement could mean acceptance for him and Ayana. What would be involved? Managing his northern range. It's good land, but it borders on Comanche territory. He needs someone who can keep the peace, prevent the kind of trouble my brother stirred up. Ayana had moved closer, listening to the conversation. Your father would trust a Comanche woman on his land? Billy met her eyes steadily. Ma'am, my father's learned that trust isn't about the color of a person's skin. It's about the content of their character. And from what he's heard, you and Mr. Brennan have plenty of that. We'll think about it, Jacob said. Yes, sir. He said to tell you there's no hurry. But the offer stands. Billy remounted his horse. Oh, and Mr. Brennan? Congratulations. Jacob frowned. For what? Billy grinned. Doc Patterson was in town yesterday. He let slip that you folks might be expecting a new edition come spring. Jacob turned to stare at Ayana, who was blushing furiously. Is that true? She nodded, suddenly shy. I was going to tell you tonight. I wanted to be sure. Jacob swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until she laughed. When he set her down, both of them were grinning like fools. A baby, he said wonderfully. Our baby, she corrected. A child who will know both worlds and be rejected by neither. How can you be so sure? Ayana touched her still flat belly, her eyes soft with love and hope. Because they will grow up knowing they are loved. And love is stronger than hatred, stronger than fear. As if to prove her point, the little gray cat rubbed against their legs, purring loudly. Jacob looked around at the cabin they'd built, the garden they'd planted, the life they'd created together against all odds. What do you think about the Hayes offer? He asked. I think it means acceptance. A chance to be part of something larger than ourselves. And if it doesn't work out? Ayana smiled, taking his hand and placing it over her heart. Then we'll build something new. We'll keep building until we get it right. That evening, as they sat by their fire watching the sun set over the valley, Jacob thought about the journey that had brought them here. It had begun with a storm and a wounded girl in his barn, and it had led to this, a love that had survived war and prejudice, a family that would bridge two worlds. "I love you," he said, the words still new enough to make his heart race. "And I love you," Iana replied, settling back against his chest. "Forever and always, my stubborn, beautiful fool." Outside, the wind whispered through the grass, carrying the promise of rain. It would be a good year for the crops, Jacob thought. A good year for new beginnings. In the spring, when their child was born, a daughter with her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn chin, they would name her Hope. Because that's what she represented. Hope for a future where love could overcome hatred, where understanding could bridge any divide. And as the years passed, their story would become legend in that part of Texas, the tale of a lonely rancher and a wounded Comanche girl who found each other in a storm and chose love over everything else. Their children would grow up strong and proud, knowing both their heritage and their destiny. And slowly, carefully, they would help build the kind of world their parents had dreamed of, a world where a person's worth was measured not by the color of their skin, but by the courage in their heart. It was a good story, Jacob thought as he held his wife close and listened to the wind. The kind of story worth living.